Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Carol Ha, Curator of Contemporary Art at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. Welcome to today's program, Join the Curator with Anawana Haloba. This program is part of an ongoing collaboration with our colleagues at the National Museum of African Art that considers connections between African and Asian spaces, identities, and histories. In 2020, the symposium AfricAsia, Overlooked Histories of Exchange, presented papers by scholars across disciplines on the cutting edge of AfricAsian studies. Further information and recordings of those sessions can be found in the scholarly programs section of our website. A publication of the proceedings is forthcoming. Now to our guests. I am delighted to introduce Anawana Haloba. Anawana's art and scholarship probes dynamics of colonialism, globalization, power, and resistance through innovative multimedia presentations, melding visual art and material culture with poetry and sound. She received her PhD from the University of Bergen's Faculty of Fine Art, Music and Design in 2020, and is a graduate of the State Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam, the Oslo National Academy of the Arts, and the Evelyn Hohn College of Applied Arts in Lusaka. As a 2013 recipient of the Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, Anawana investigated women's roles in African and Caribbean liberation movements through the writings of Frantz Fanon and collections research at the National Museums of African Art, Asian Art, and African American History and Culture. Her ongoing practice remains invested in post-independence sociopolitics. Her work has been shown worldwide, including here in DC at the National Museum of African Art, as well as the Centre Pompidou in Paris and the Sharjah Biennial, among others. Our co-discussant is Karen Milbourne, who has been at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art since 2008 and is currently senior curator. Previously, Karen led the Department of the Arts of Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific Islands at the Baltimore Museum of Art and served as assistant professor of art history at the University of Kentucky. She received her PhD in art history from the University of Iowa in 2003 and has been the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including a prestigious Fulbright Fellowship and the Smithsonian Secretary's Award for Excellence. For the next 40 minutes or so, Anawana, Karen, and I will focus on 3 of Anawana's installations. And now I turn it over to Karen. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Carol. And thank you so much for organizing this. It's such an honor to be here with you today and absolutely to be here with you, Anawana. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that the Smithsonian is located on the ancestral lands of the Nacotchtank, also known as Anacostan, and Piscataway communities who cared for this region for millennia until the land was taken by white settlers. Many of the buildings which dominate DC's landscape today, including the White House and US Capitol, were built through the efforts of enslaved laborers. Indeed, the stone used to quarry the original Smithsonian building, known as the Castle, was likely quarried by skilled Black laborers considered at the time to be the property of the wife and grandson of America's first president, George Washington. Today, we will discuss themes of repair, empathy, and healing, and among the steps toward these are recognition of these under-recognized stories and histories. So to get us started, Anawana, I was hoping you might introduce us to your 2018 work, Conversations with Stitched Up Lips, but as Carol said in her introduction, you were a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, and this work really very much relates to the research you had hoped to do while you were a SARF, tracing Fanon's roots and among other things. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about your findings during your SARF fellowship, and then introduce the 2018 work, Conversations with Stitched Up Lips.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me and inviting me to be part of this discussion, Carol. I really appreciate, and also putting us together with Karen. I came for the 2013 fellowship with a project which was called Carving a Feminist from Fanon. And I think that project was basically inspired from the fact that I had come to Norway as a student, and I was interested in the ideas of myself, but I was also inspired by Fanon. And over the years, I also came across different feminist groups that were inspired by Fanon's writing. So I think at the same time, I also came across of also the critique which was leveled at his writing, especially his reading of Meoti Kapasia's work. So I thought when Karen invited me to apply for the SEF fellowship, I thought, well, maybe I could use my time there to research on that. And I should admit that when I arrived, I got a little bit lost within the system, and also to know where to go for or what really I wanted to do there. But I spent days and days at the Film Archive in Maryland. And also, I also realized that there was a lot of information on Algeria, actually, Fanon's second home, at the Free and Sakla Museum, which is the Asian museum. And being that Algeria is in Africa, that was also an interesting kind of link there. So I wouldn't say really that by the time at my time at the Smithsonian, I was able to actually carve, something out of the research which I was collecting. But I think I had very interesting collection of data, which became very instrumental towards the work which we are going to talk, and also which then became my PhD program, research, because then also it kind of, I got this interest of how to situate that research from the Smithsonian within also a Nordic kind of discourse, whether to also find thinkers that would be similar to Fanon's way of thinking within the Norwegian context as well. So yeah, I think that's what I can say as maybe an introduction to the process. Conversations with Stitched Up Lips. The exhibition is basically a process exhibition. I saw it as a process exhibition, and I presented the exhibition itself as sound stations of contradiction, findings, intrigues, rejections, suggestive also from the different people I was going around and interviewing. So when I applied for my PhD course or position, it was very hard to be enrolled, because I was told by many times that I should find somebody closer to Fanon to compare with, and like to find the Norwegian kind of counterpart in this project, which was Bjørnson Bjørnstjerne, a writer who basically died 15 years before Frantz Fanon is born, lived through the industrialization of Norway, and also during the vibrant feminist movement in Norway, led by like Charlotte Collett from Norway, one of the founders of the Norwegian feminism. But I think what intrigued me to kind of create this relationship was that when I was reading through, I came across some kind of almost sentences which really connected to some of Fanon's reading within the Algerian Unveiled. So I thought, well, I was in the right place, but also the fact that being in Norway, I somehow felt that Bjornsson, despite having lived in the 1800s, that he somehow spoke for me, than any kind of theorist I had encountered or thinker at the time I was here. So I thought that was an interesting link. So when I started the PhD program, I felt that I needed a kind of a time frame in which I deal with each one of the thinkers I was working with at a time. So I decided to have this period which I called Inhabiting Fanon's and Inhabiting Bjornsson's life. And I was going to follow Fanon's influence on different schools of thought, whichever they were going to lead me. So I started traveling back to Zambia as well, knowing that the Fanon's rhetoric was also part of it became the rhetoric of the decolonization from settler colonialism in the Anglophone. So I went to Zambia. I had some discussions with artists, with scholars, read through some archive material, came back to Norway, talked to scholars in the UK, and then I also came across the Dar es Salaam debates of the 60s, 70s, which were led by Walter Rodney and Wamdere, a Ugandan historian at the University of Dar es Salaam. So I was very curious because I also understood that some of the scholars like Issa Shivji, who's still alive, Mamdan in Uganda at the Ugandan Makerere University, but also Wamba Diawamba Ernest, who was a Congolese freedom fighter, also sponsored my Nyerere to fight Mobutu Sese Seko. So it was all these really intriguing. Penina Wamlima, who was a theater maker at the Dar es Salaam University in the 70s, 80s. So I was very happy to go to Dar es Salaam and meet all these people. But that was intriguing, but I think the more I spent time, the more I had a lot of questions with the material I was collecting for a year. And then I thought I wanted to have a discussion with those materials. So that's how I created the exhibitions, Conversations with Stitched Up Lips. And it was about listening. So maybe we can go to the slides. Yeah. So there are 3 rooms at the Kunstverening, which was headed by Mariana Hutman, who is just moved now to the north of Norway, where she's going to head another institution. But she invited me because she was also interested in this discussion I was having. So she invited me to present this conversation. So this is actually the 3rd room. This is where you go, where you leave the exhibition space. And in this 3rd room, if we start from back to front, so in this 3rd room, it's basically, I have rewritten some of the conversation, the interviews into a 4-way conversation with voice actors. And in the background of these voices, I did a research on Bela music from Martinique, which is playing in the background. And in this also, I use my own body to drum, to create the drums which go with the Bela music to create kind of a layered sound. Or kind of an ambience compared to just the voices singing and the people dancing, the laughing. So that's what you actually encounter in this room. So in a way, it's not really like an exhibition where you go to just see and enjoy. It's basically a listening station where you go in, you learn something because of the discussion, which is going on, even if it's enacted. So it has some references of history also to today. I mean, you have one of the voices which is talking about in the relation of some, to rethink Fanon in this day in relation to, for example, to example like Marikana mining disaster at the time when I was working on the material. So it's kind of I also tried to kind of position the discussion as if they were happening today, and either whether it was the kind of the nationalist movements which were developing in Europe and also the reflection on that. So to play on that as well. We can go to the second slide. Maybe the next one. Yeah, so this was the second room when you came in. And this second room, I'm cheating here because for some reason, I remember a poem which I wrote in 2012. And that poem has so much resonance with what is going on. And also because the moment you bring also people to listen to this kind of heavy discussion of also words and information, which is that you also needed to have a kind of a moment where you break that into what would I call it? A moment of healing, but the healing which is actually goes back to talking about this situation which the whole work is talking about. So in this room, you have a poem which I wrote and I recite it myself. I play also with just how to get something, something which is good for you, which heals you. Because when I was a kid, I grew up with this idea that if you had mumps, you would have to scream in a mortar, in a pounding mortar, where they pound rice and groundnuts. And if you scream so loud, the mumps will go away, or the tonsils. And for a long time, I didn't understand what was the trick behind. I asked my mother later, who told me that because we would pound the herbs, in that mortar before the child actually screams in the mortar, and because they're inhaling the herbs, and that help to soften the tonsils and the mumps after a week will go away. And so in this work, I actually got the cassava, dried cassava, which I rub inside, and dried cassava has this smell which comes out like it's like somebody has been baking cakes. That's my relationship to dried cassava smell. So everyone had to sit on the stool, which the stools I also just made in relation to the common stools you find at home with goat skin, which I bought from a friend of mine who is a percussionist whom I work with from time to time. So I had this people, they would go into to kind of put their faces inside this this ceramic bowl. So this was what was happening in this room. In the next slide, yeah. So in this room, which is also kind of the introduction of these listening stations, there was a lot of food in all these meetings I was having with people. There's a lot of food sharing, and the pot became kind of a reoccurring image in my mind, but also because there was rhythm as well. So I decided to create these listening kind of pots, which look like dryers, but also there's something about a sound that is so soft, like a whisper on your head, that sometimes you wonder whether this is your own sound from your mind, or maybe somebody whispering, that this is not, maybe it's not necessarily somebody whispering something, but maybe it's your own thought. So So I wrote this poem in short, very short stanzas, which I had people from different ages recite, and then they were played in these pots with very tiny microphone speakers. You almost don't see them when you are looking under there. And for each session that you see, there's a different story. But also I worked with metal, but I had to kind of play with it to distort it, to kind of create the movement of rhythm in the metal that is kind of in the space. Because also when you get in this first room, even if it's very silent and you have these voices which are quite intimate, you also have the sound coming from the third room, almost like a whisper far away, which also creates adds to the atmosphere of the space. So I don't know if I should explain more, or maybe I should probably.
Well, I have a question, and then maybe you can explain some more. I mean, one of the things that really, one of the things that's so striking in thinking about listening, and in a way that silence is often written about, it's often equated with stillness, and yet there's nothing still to me in your approach. It's very much about active listening. And one of the things that's interesting in looking at your slides is you get this sense of stillness, perhaps because these particular photographs don't have audience or participants in them, but I've seen the work with, audience members, and I'm wondering what they bring to it, the activation of your audience there, that you have this practice that's about this inclusiveness of voices, and how do you include the voice of the people who come, and how do the different backgrounds of the people who come to the exhibition, how have they changed it for you, or did they?
Yeah, well, I think what was because I saw that people also, for instance, in the wooden in the room with the tree trunk, a lot of people sat there also to use it as rest. They were leaning on it, and then you wondered whether.
Maybe back up, just so people can see.
Yeah, and then you wondered whether is it for therapeutical purposes, or was it for kind of, but of course, for me, I think why I also made the chairs to sit, there's also this idea that under the mango tree, I mean, this is not mango, this is, I think it's björk, birch, one of the Norwegian trees, or maybe pine, actually. So, but there's this idea that under the tree, a lot of activity happens. So in a way, it was interesting to also see that people were sitting there, but the conversation that came from the tree trunk created a different conversation in the space. It was not basically it was almost kind of taking the discussion from the tree trunk into a different discussion that reflects on the text, the sound in the room, but also it was just interesting to see like different discussions that came out as well, which were also about the same discussion the work was suggesting, but also from different perspective, and also I think maybe contextualizing it within the Norwegian kind of understanding, what is this listening about, and how does that affect the new conversation in which we find ourselves as Brexit in the UK, as different kind of the Swedish nationalist movement, also here some remnants of nationalistic kind of ideas which are going up and up. So that was an interesting discussion to have around the discussion of Fanon. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Maybe before as we scroll back up to where we were, and think towards the next piece, I'd love to hear you talk about the materials a little bit. Your use of the goat skin covered stools. And I mean, you were talking about the medicinal impacts or implications of the gourds, but I'd love to hear more about, why you're working with these very specific materials in the context that you were. And that idea of positionality, I think, actually will be a great transition to the next work.
I think my interest in material is basically because I know that my practice is based on social politics in many ways. So the community is always somehow reflected in. So in what means and what kind of elements which are common within a community, how do they come in? How do they become part of the conversation? So in a way, the goat skin, because the stew, for instance, it's for sitting, right? But it's also a drum, So in a way, it also talks about there's a silent drum that is in the whole space. For me, maybe that is not obvious for everyone that comes in. Maybe they just see it as a stew, but because it's made out of skin, once you hit it, it produces a totally different sound and the different sizes. So there's all this kind of rhythm of which also I think it goes again to body, how the body moves within the community and what kind of influences around it. So that is a thing for me, the stew and the skin, because it's also something I think before this work, there's a work which is not part of this, which is called To Mass by All Means, that I create the furniture with partly goat skin and the drum to play with the idea of the sound, of course, which is in the zamrock, which I create. So, and the pot, of course, again, it goes back again to deal with the same kind of ideas of how different materials are used or different objects are used within a culture. But of course, I'm using the pots in a different way here, that they are containers. I mean, a pot is a container, it's which food, it carries something, but once you turn it around, it means that it takes out everything which inhabits in it. So here, like the voice, which is the food, which is kind of putting out, exposing it. And of course, it's always very hard to understand whether, I guess, as a research-based artist, because you are like reading and you're trying to do all these things. And then there's a question also whether after you put the work in the space, whether all these tiny elements of reflection within the research, whether they come out. And sometimes, of course, there's this obsession of wanting to either that maybe that conversation comes out in one way or another from the audience, and maybe doesn't, and also maybe that becomes a small frustration on the artist's behalf. But I think the overall, for me, the overall importance, how the viewer should interact with the material as in the objects, the material as in the text, the invisible material, is also if the work it's able to create a dialogue. And that dialogue should not end within the exhibition space, that it should be a dialogue that generates, like almost kind of creating some kind of archival dialogue, that regenerating archive. I don't know if I make myself clear, but it's some of these things that I think that the material has to come up with, and regenerating kind of elasticity in the dialogue, that it can be something, but the symbolic also has to be carried within that dialogue. So, yeah.
I think that's actually a great way then to transition to Dragon King on Sleepy Pride Rock, both in terms of thinking about the regenerative nature of the archive, but also the positionality of what these materials say and thinking about who's speaking and what these mean.
I find, oh, sorry. I was going to pick up the baton for a second and just comment that throughout all of your installations, the simplicity of the physical aspects, the dimensions, and the kind of quotidian scale of the objects and the materials really does belie the kind of richness of historical layers and all of the research and your own writing that you interweave throughout the experience of the work. And for me, this Dragon King at Sleepy Pride Rock, which looks specifically at the relationship between China and Zambia that is sort of embodied or symbolized in one of the largest sort of projects at the time in the early 70s of the Tazara Railway, which, of course, I'll let you speak more to the historical details, but it's a fascinating example of how a particular project begun already nearly half a century ago still shifts. Its physical reality is shifting, but it's also the sort of larger political, historical, and symbolic context that is shifting as well. So I'd love to hear more about how you conceived this installation.
Yeah. Well, the Dragon King in Sleepy Pride Rock, which is of course from Animal, Lion King, as in Pride Rock. So I think, I mean, when I started looking at the Tazara, I was also talking to my uncle who is now retired. I mean, it's also very interesting that when I started working on the rail, he was still working, and then in the process also he had left as he was then the director of the Tazara and I think what was interesting was also to talk to him about the rail line after he had retired, which was also quite a very incisive conversation we had. And I think for me also, I think the rail line is also very important for me because it's also partly my history. My grandfather worked on the rail line on the other side, the Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, or one of the workers that came to work on the rail line in Zambia. So I think for me, these kind of elements were like both personal, but also kind of to just understand, like if we were going to talk about China, but also to position the historical reasoning of the politics in relation to this dynamics of relationship of China and Zambia. I think it became like a very interesting case study to start from because firstly, of course, the Tazara project in the 60s was not the first time China had knowledge of Africa. I mean, it starts already during the dynasty period, but it also comes also in the 1920s, for instance. I'll talk about Southern Africa because that's much more closer to me, that already you had also in the 1920s, the Cantonese Chinese people that came to South Africa, you know, and of course, like today, when you think about the Chinese people that came to South Africa, you would know that the biggest South African Chinese people are found in Canada because they started living, of course, with apartheid later in the years, in the 60s as well. But what was interesting was that the Tazara is a symbol that puts Zambia at the center of the liberation movement in the whole region of Southern Africa. There's a reason why this rail line came in, because it came in because Zambia had depended on South Africa when it comes to trade to the port, and they needed a different route. Zambia had approached the United States and the Canadian governments to help build a road towards Dar es Salaam, and that did not happen. And of course, at that time in the 60s, Nyerere had started his implementation of developing the rural areas, the Ujamaa, the land feeding its own people. So, and the rail line became one of those probably maybe a better technology to reach out to those remote areas. So he had started talking, of course, to the Soviet Union, and that did not work. And then, of course, the Chinese came in as partly a very well orchestrated help with the solidarity movement of against capitalism and colonialism. So they came in with full money, not just money but resources as well, to help build this rail line, which was not a gift. It was a loan which was going to be paid slowly. And I'll tell you that through the Kaunda government, through the Chiluba government, the MMD, the PF government, that this loan was not paid. So, and by now, when I'm working on this project, Zambia has incurred more loans, probably 14 more loans on top of the Tazara rail line. But I think what this project also, as a project of development, but also a project of friendship, that I think what it shows is a different approach to aid, Western aid and Chinese aid, infrastructure and money aid. Because also when China is building infrastructure and different stuff, it's not something new, because China experienced itself with how Japan helped China by bringing infrastructure, expertise of people to help it develop. So it's the same model which China adopted and using on Africa and Zambia in this case. But of course, there's two different elements here, because the time that Tazara was built, the relationship between Zambia and Tanzania was a very different one, very special one for that matter, because Nyerere and Kaunda had a very special kind of friendship, which was not just the bilateral, but it was almost like a brotherhood, Nyerere saw Kaunda as his young brother. By the time the MMD were coming, Chiluba's relationship and the then president of Tanzania was so different. And those elements actually also kind of shows how the shift on how the bilateral relationships are happening in between these countries to today. And the time when I was working on this, we had Lungu in power. And that was also very different dynamics. And also the elements of the corruption, the other elements which are in these countries, which also affect the working together of how this relationship has worked, and also whether economically, how the Tazara is helping the communities in the country. So, I mean, I point out to a lot of things, but then how to express those things within art, So that is because it's a conversation. This conflict, or you would call it conflict. Some other people, I mean. Others would say China's kind of knowing exploitation of Africa, on purpose. Other people would say that Africans also to blame. So in a way, like this kind of layered conversation, how do you then bring it to the fore using common people, how they relate to these kind of discussions without trying to, this research, I'm doing this on this and I'm looking at this from this because I'm writing about it. But how do the people that lives on the stations of this rail, what do they think? The people that use the rail, what do they think about the rail line? How does it affect their lives? So I had we had research, people traveling between the 2 points from Dar es Salaam to Kapiri and the other way around, and interviewing people also on the train. So it was very interesting. You had people that felt that because we owe China so much, so they have somehow the what is the English word? That they have the right to different resources. They can take over they can demand to take over a broadcasting for a lower amount because we owe them money. There's all these discussions, but also the other discussion, which was the symbolic, why this was here. Why did this come in, which was also very interesting to also speak to the first locomotive driver of this Tazara train. Also because now I've forgotten the year, but during the 80s and the 70s, Zambia was very at the forefront of the liberation struggle. So in many ways, the South African apartheid government and UDI's Ian Smith, they bombed Zambia in many ways, and the Tazara rail line was also bombed, but it was only one of the bombs happened a few minutes after the lady locomotive driver had just crossed one of the bridges where the bomb fell. And it was also interesting to hear her talk about this experience from this position about not knowing when you would find yourself in that situation. I don't know if I'm just rambling in my head because now I can hear myself thinking.
and that's, I think, what's wonderful about your work is you have this sense that it can constantly evolve, that the presentation of it is but a moment in time of the full work, as it were, of your practice. Not to short shrift the third part of the discussion, I just wanted to perhaps ask if you could give a brief sense. What we're looking at is just one part of an installation that really takes in the sort of a kind of physical interaction, if you will, with this perspective on this history, the rail tie, the maize cob. So I think there are many sort of fascinating material aspects of this work. Maybe you could just touch on that briefly.
Yeah. So what you're seeing now is basically the historical kind of context. So you have a few images which are from the some of the posters also, which are from, because during this period both China, I think, was trying to actually also justify why they were having this, they were putting so much money into this project. So they made these posters where they showed Africans, the one on the far corner, almost into the corner of the wall, it's soldiers, African soldiers reading about Chairman Mao and they look very much with all these smiles, There were songs as well which were sung by soldiers, by workers about how great Beijing was. And then in the 3 screens, I made a kind of a satirical, this work is called The Dragon King in Sleepy Pride Rock, which is also the Sleepy Pride Rock, which kind of a metaphor for corrupt African leaders and the dragon king who tries to take advantage of that. So, so you have this kind of element. So I made this kind of a small animated video, which also uses some archive material with the fact that somehow the masses have decided to revolt, against the king of Pride Rock, who is being hypnotized by gold bars. So I write this very satirical kind of script, which I read in this small video. And unfortunately, that text is actually not received very well in Shanghai. So the whole video also is not shown in the 2016 Shanghai Biennial, because it's then does not go through the censorship in the 5th round of censors. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And in this slide, these are the 14 stations on the Tazara rail line. And in each one of this speaker calabash, there's a short story that comes from that station. And the stories are inspired by people that remember, for instance, their parents who worked on the rail line, or it was the people that had come from China and worked on the rail line either as interpreters or as cooks or as engineers. So all these stories are mixed with the story of that area. So this is what you hear when you are walking across these 14 speakers. So we can also go in this room. And in this room, because this image you see is from the Sharjah Biennial, and in this room, because when the work was censored in Shanghai, I was asked to write about to come up with a text, And I remember having these conversations with the curators that I think if I'm going to write something, I cannot write something without, alluding to the censorship, And then they say, well, then the work is going to be censored again. Then I thought, then how do I write it? Then I thought, okay, maybe I'm just going to write, because I'm talking about Pride Rock, which is this, jungle or this special place. So maybe I should use the animals as analogies for the text. So I write a text where I use snails and meerkats and the elephant that falls, and which when it falls, everyone hears about it. But I don't know how that text actually managed to pass and be played in the exhibition. But so that twist becomes part of the project, that this new twist to this. So it's actually playing in this room and in this room you also have this tiny kind of mishmash of photography, what do you call, montage, which I did. And on top of the photograph montage, I had this very kind of tracing paper, which I kind of emphasize one picture or one part of the drawing. And then for each one, I either write a poem, a short text poem, which either reflect on that or just, or maybe a poem. Like, for instance, I also used like a quote from Zimbabwean poet, the late Chenjerai Hova, who writes about how in Zimbabwe we elect monkeys. So this is from that poem. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And yeah, so I think this is one of the texts which I just wrote, one of the fragments. So it's just a phrase, but this was also trying to play with the fact that the way China is received today in Africa compared to how it was received at the time when Nyerere and Kaunda were working with the China Tazara project, and now how this the relationship, how Lungu and was that Kikwete before, I think when Lungu came into power, I think there were 3 presidents. It changed 3 times in Tanzania with different presidents. Now I don't remember exactly which president at that time, but there's like the different dynamics of the relationship. So this is where this text is coming from. We can go to the next. Yeah, and this is the text from Chenjerai Hova, which also reads about the monkey who passes himself for a lion and climbs very high in the tree, you know. So I play around because this is actually not really this is not the exact, it's almost like a homage to Chenjerai Hova, which I'm writing by a kind of my translation of his poem. So this is also why I write also for Chenjerai Hova, as in his critique, I think, on what Zimbabwe had been that time when I was working also in relation to also China politics. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, maybe I'll use this moment to transition back to Karen for the 3rd work, but the use of allegory, poetry, language is so central, and even the newsprint that you cover over and redraw on really become interesting devices to pull us out of the specificities of a particular historical context, you know, from the non-aligned, perhaps the more non-aligned period of the Cold War and moving forward to today. So that in a way, the next work further distills that emphasis on sound and language and composition, perhaps. Karen, I'll let you take us through that work.
Okay. So I think there are 2 components that when it's the synergy between them, that's what makes your work so extraordinary. So there is this material component that Carol just described so eloquently, but that it's, to me, what I find so inspirational and moving in your work is the way that it is about a methodology and a practice of healing, and how you look at psychic, physical, social, environmental healing. And I was hoping that maybe you could use that lens maybe to introduce the work that you're working on now and where you're going next in thinking about in your next piece. And I know that we're just first going to listen to it. So.
Yeah, how to repair my grandmother's basket. I mean, I think I actually, because this is in this, I think in this work, which I also see as kind of an ongoing project at the moment as well. It again, I think, it has different elements because, well, maybe I shouldn't start from there. I should start from where it comes from. So, I mean, it goes back to the to also the situating a discussion within the community as well, but also learn from it, because in this work I basically decided I also wanted to work with elements and knowledges which exist within how one kind of deals with tragic, you know, but also love, life. And for me, I think it's also called an experimental opera. And I think that's also where the opera comes from, because opera is a celebration of life, you know, both tragic and love. I think this is where it came from. And over, because you talk about this writing of poetry, and I grew up with a mom who was both, she was a teacher, but at the same time, she participated in different practices, which maybe most people would think that if you are working as a teacher or you're educated, you cannot be part of that, or maybe it's unchristian. For instance, what we call muba or nzila, which is, or for most Zambians which are not Lozi speaking, it to be called mashawe, which is basically indigenous religions and spirituality processes, you know, where there's an occurrence where somebody kind of manifests, you know. You could also, these are also traditions of healing, which include song, movement, and different other elements, prayer or ritual as well. And because the orality of these cultures is so prevalent within the culture, so it's somehow, I think that's what one would say that, oh, I would maybe claim that that also has very much a sense in how I work with this text or writing, which is also a mode of listening, but not listening to what has been said, but listening to the unsaid things, you know, listening to nature, listening to the in-between discussions, and then writing it within the contemporary gaze of, you know, situations and contexts and backgrounds, which are now. So I think that's what I'm doing, and in it, of course, these elements which you mentioned, Karen, they are very very live. When what you heard now, for instance, in this work, which I call the opening glee of the opera, is the choir group from Livingstone, which is singing this song, which I record and use in this project as an opening glee, but as an opening glee that kind of upsets the situation, which is there, kind of brings to attention in a way that I'm here. So in explaining this work, because I'm also showing it here in the Western world, but the text itself, the libretto which I wrote, it is a shift between all these places of being, because a shift of not just me on how I shift within positions in which I have to, you know, kind of adapt, because I think I think this shift also is to kind of explain maybe what I would like to call that the different heres in which I exist as a thinker, as an artist, as one trying to rethink, to reflect on the philosophical kind of understanding from a cultural perspective, but also from my own perspective, because as you move, you change the way you look, you create a philosophy, you create a perspective of in which lens you look at things. So, and these heres in which I exist in, they have a way in which things are done. So I have to adapt into this shift. So this is what I also try to write in the libretto, which is the 12 stanzas. So it's not only a discussion of the mind, but it's a discussion of places and also of the relational kind of the other person who is next to me. This is also where the word grandmother comes in the title, because I actually use the same title for a course which I teach in the university to be a linking, element for every one of the students who is in that course, whether they come from China or from Mexico or from Germany or from Zambia, whichever where, because even if you don't have a grandmother, biologically, you must have had one time, So it's something which one can relate to as a point of beginning, a beginning in the idea that to begin is like a decision in which we all start on the same level to look at our own relationship, kind of to understand the opacity in between us, but also to understand the elements that are around us and how we can talk about them in order to have this kind of way in which we can see each other. Because if you play the whole, in the end, you have this like, see me, see the God in me, so it reveals yours. So this kind of, what is happening. So I know I'm not talking really so much about the elements of the work, but I'm talking around it. So the elements you see on the stage, I don't call them speakers for me. They don't exist as speakers, they exist as vessels. They exist as vessels which are an extension of all the voices that are reflected in this libretto. So they are vessels, they're extensions, they are bodies in space, and they are acting within this space. And the viewer as well comes in and becomes part of that kind of performative action of co-respond, within this space, answer, be confronted with, because I think there are elements in the text which are accusative in a way, but they're not really accusing you completely. Some of them are cynical, but they are accusing in such a way to say like, come, it's like, my pale skin, but under this pale skin, the redness is similar to yours. I have inclinations which I could not explain, but somehow they are also yours and they are mine too. So in many ways, I think in this work as well, without completely, underlining it, I think to some extent also is channeling the ideas of the poetics of relation with Glissant is thinking, but in the active, if you would say. So, I don't know, I've just in the thinking, because, and also to just say about the sound itself, because the sound, you heard that when the music was ending, there was steps walking, basically. So the musicality of the work is also built from a referential kind of point of view of also memory. Like what I do with my friend Siddiq, where I buy the goat skin. He's a percussionist. So was to go through a phase of listening to sounds that come from the region where I come from, Southern Africa, and then to listen to them for like continuously for 2 weeks, and then not listen to them for some time, and then go into the studio and recreate the sound from memory, as in the conversation between me and him talking, because there are points where he's drumming and I'm using my feet. Yeah. So this conversation and this composition, the whole thing is made into this in the studio. Like basically, it's not in the way you write opera with with all the musical kind of language, but it's about the body, the sound the body creates. Whether it's the clap, whether it's the scream, all these plays into, or whether it's the elements, the horns which I use, which I call vessels, but I also use them because they're also coming from the idea that in the way Tonga, they have a ceremony which is called Wudima, which the Smithsonian has quite a lot of recordings from that. It's by the way Tonga people that were moved out from the Zambezi plains up land for when they were going to build the Kariba Dam. And they use this as a flute. And they have this ceremony which is called Wudima, where they remember the people that died in that disaster, because there was a flood which was 7 times the flow of the Zimbabwe, of the Zambezi, which also kind of broke the whole wall which was being built. Of course, the locals would also say that this was the anger from Nyami Nyami, the river god from that area, which both the Lozis and the Wetonga kind of pray to. And for me, I think to be able to use that vessel, this flute, but also as a vessel that carries kind of, which can be used as to extend a body, to extend a story, which of the libretto which I write here. And also I understand also by using these horns that each one has got a different texture, thickness, and that actually affects the sound that comes from it in the space. So that was also kind of discoveries which were in between the work which comes out. There's this the bronze thing in the middle, which is also my own invention of Namalwa. Namalwa is the instrument which the Plateau Tongas play when they do what is called Guyavila, which is a kind of an operatic tradition of speaking poetry, or actually sorrow or praise. You use it in and there are different types of this kind of music. And there are also one which is just a voice and which is played in this. And maybe we can also go to 10 of the sound so we can listen to the Giavilo. So
unfortunately, I think we are out of time, but before I know it's gone so fast, I can keep going. But before I turn it over to Carol, I just wanted to thank you. I mean, because I think one of the things that's not recognized enough with sound is its incredibly sculptural components. And I love the way that you extend the sculptural nature of sound to really this understanding of the relational nature. And I think that that's really so important. And to turn over to Carol, I just wanted to speak, I mean, to acknowledge your idea of repair, and literally re and pair, and this idea of bringing histories together, because I think it's a perfect note on which to end. When we have paired an Asian art museum and an African art museum, it's another one of these pairings and looking at understandings relationally. And so thank you for that. And over to you, Carol.
Thank you both. Yes, there really is so much to talk about, and I do sincerely hope that we have a chance to pursue these discussions further, ideally in person. It has been certainly a pleasure to speak to both of you, Anawana and Karen. Anawana, thank you so much for sharing your work. You give us much to think about. And Karen, thank you for providing your insight into the works. I would like to express my gratitude as well to my colleagues, Mary Mulcahy, Grace Murray, and Andy Finch for their work behind the scenes to make this program possible. Thank you certainly to our audience for hanging in there and for participating today, listening. We're so glad you could join us. For more information, please stay tuned to The Studio, the National Museum of Asian Art's Contemporary Art virtual space. You'll find the link in the chat. Thank you again, and have a lovely afternoon, everyone.